Russia claimed that at least 248 Chinese troops were killed, and of the Soviet border guards, 32 were dead and 14 wounded. The Chinese side shipped one of the crippled Soviet T-62 tanks to Beijing's military museum. In another incident, on August 13th, Soviet troops ambushed a Chinese patrol in a region called Terekti, which straddles the border of China's Xinjiang province and what is today the country of Kazakhstan. The Chinese side reported 35 military personnel and 3 reporters killed in the incident. There were no Russian casualties. On March 21st, a couple of days after the fighting on Zhenbao Island, Alexei Kosygin, the Soviet premier, placed an urgent call to Mao Zedong. The Chinese switchboard operator refused to make a connection for him, retorting, "You are the head of the Soviet revisionists. You don't deserve to speak with our great leader." Kosygin then requested to speak with Premier Zhou. The operator said, "Our premier is too busy to speak with you," and hung up the phone. Mao and Zhou later reprimanded the operator for hanging up before reporting the call to her superiors. The Soviet leader was almost in despair. The two premiers did not get to speak with each other until 6 months later. It is well documented that the Soviet Union had considered a preemptive surgical strike against China's nuclear bases and certain border cities. According to various reports, the Soviet Union had asked the United States to stay neutral in the event of a nuclear attack on China. But the Nixon administration refused and leaked the information to the press, forcing the Soviets to abandon the plan. I have doubts whether the Russians had seriously considered such a nuclear strike, because by then, China already possessed not only atomic but also hydrogen bombs, and the consequences of a nuclear conflict would have been unimaginable. It's possible the Soviets had suggested neutrality as a trial balloon for testing the U.S. reaction. In any case, the Politburo was reportedly terrified of a large-scale Chinese intrusion into Soviet territory. A nightmare vision of invasion by millions of Chinese made the Soviet leaders almost frantic, wrote Arkady Shevchenko, a high-ranking Russian defector to the United States, in his memoir. Despite our overwhelming superiority in weaponry, it would not be easy for the USSR to cope with an assault of this magnitude. In view of China's vast population and long experience in guerrilla warfare, Shevchenko wrote, the Soviets feared that an attack on China's nuclear program would leave them mired in an endless war. The name of the Construction Army Corps suggested dual purposes of our organization. One was to build and develop the border area. The other was to defend it when necessary. It was for the latter reason we were organized like an army, with leadership positions at the company level and above, staffed by active duty officers. While by and large we were not armed, we were always aware that we would have to fight if called to do so. In mid-October 1969, the grain was brought in and a woeful accounting was made. Our company's harvest was only 70,000 kilograms, about 140,000 pounds, for the year. Before we came, a mere dozen farmers had produced about 500,000 kilograms, about 1 million pounds, and we were tending a much larger piece of land than they, because the 300 of us young people had greatly expanded the fields. Even worse was that we had sowed about 750,000 kilograms, about 1.6 million pounds, of seeds. That meant that after a year of hard work, much fertilizer, and countless machine hours, not to mention the other costs of farming this land, our entire harvest equaled about 1/10 the weight of the seeds. The leaders now organized political sessions to study next year's economic plan. Initially, the plan had called for 900,000 kilograms, about 2 million pounds, of grain. In view of the output by the old farm, this should have been well within reach. But having learned of our actual output, headquarters had scaled down the target to 90,000 kilograms, about 20,000 pounds. They still allotted about 750,000 kilograms, about 1.6 million pounds, of seeds. It did not take an expert to know that this made no economic sense. Instructor Zhang